We're living at a moment in history where undue influence, which is the term lawyers use as opposed to due influence or ethical influence, we're living in a time of unprecedented undue influence and psychological manipulation through the media and through social media and use of our personal data and AI to target people, to bend their emotions and thoughts and feelings. And speaking about Charlie Kirk and the assassination, there was a report from Associated Press that there was unprecedented levels of Chinese, Russian, and Iranian disinformation that was being spewed throughout our social media to incite a civil war, because they would really like Americans to kill each other, and they really have a vested interest in deepening polarization as opposed to unifying people to come together for values and principles, because they really want to take down the United States as the superpower that's been able to keep authoritarian countries in check. And unfortunately, the public is largely ignorant about the whole idea of psychological warfare, and how to tell even the difference between facts and evidence-based reporting and conspiracy theories and disinformation and misinformation, and now deep fakes and such. So I invite people to come to Freedom of Mind, my website. You can download this graphic, which is, I call the influence continuum. And it helps to describe ethical influence values, which is critical that we all think about these things as we navigate our world, as we talk to our children and our grandchildren and people in our community, that we want. And I heard you announce someone's going to speak about spirituality in a future talk. This is about love. This is about conscience. This is about respect for your unique individuality. This is about a cloned pseudo-identity in the image of the cult or the cult leader. This is about critical thinking and access to different sources of information. This is about propaganda and what I refer to as my bite model of authoritarian control. And you can download that. It's a 2-page thing off of my freedomofmind.com website. But if you control people's behavior, information, thoughts, and feelings, you can control their identity, and you can radicalize them, and can get them to do violence. And a lot is being done online in this area. It's an area that I've studied extensively that I can talk about. And it's going to become more and more critical to have trustworthy sources of information to reality test in the times ahead. And I would like to just comment, if you haven't read my book, The Cult of Trump, which is what I thought we were going to be talking about today. It was re-released before the 2024 election with a foreword by George Conway and an afterword by myself. I highly recommend reading it because it really is an explanatory framework for what's happening politically in our country. And in the book, I interviewed a Stanford PhD, and I'm going to be interviewing him again for my podcast. James Scaminacci III. He was a 20-year veteran in intelligence, and he did his Stanford PhD in political sociology on fourth-generation psychological warfare. And so I wrote about it in The Cult of Trump, but I'll explain briefly. This was first described by an American military strategist named William Lind in the 1980s. And it was a methodology used by the U.S. against dictatorships around the world where we wanted to do regime change. And the idea was to attack experts, science, and democratic institutions to create distrust, uncertainty, to ready people to be manipulated and indoctrinated. And Michael Flynn, who was ejected from the government for taking money from Russia, is an expert in fourth generation psychological warfare, and he has now been forensically connected to QAnon psyop. And it was, in fact, not just an organic thing. It started as an organic thing, but the Russians took it over, and Michael Flynn assumed a very prominent role encouraging people to be digital soldiers. I think he took out a copyright for that term even. And we know William Lynn paired up with Paul Weyrich of the Christian Right in the 80s, and they've been using fourth generation psychological warfare on Americans for decades. And why? Well, if you're a creationist, you don't want science to say the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. You want people to accept that it's 6,000 years old. If you're the Coke Corporation or in the oil industry or a fracking industry, you don't want anybody to be interested in alternative energy sources because you want to keep making money. And of course, it's heating the planet. But it turns out that I interviewed a man named David Lipsky on his book, The Parrot and the Igloo. And it was a book on climate science denial that went back to the 1800s. But the revelation for me was my former cult, the Moonies. Their Washington Times newspaper has been the center for climate science denial information since its inception, some 50 years ago. And I did get deprogrammed from the Moonies 49 years ago. So the timetable, even though I left and I've been a whistleblower ever since, the Moonies are still major players in the political scene and doing propaganda and doing political activities. I should say Moon died in 2012. His wife took over the main entity, and there are two sons in Pennsylvania. One has an AR-15 gun cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries. And the other one has a gun factory that makes AR-15s and car arms and other weapons. And Sean Moon, who does the Rod of Iron Ministries, has a crown of golden AR-15 bullets. You can go to his website, rodofironministries.org. And he and Michael Flynn have been doing the Rod of Iron Freedom Festivals around the United States, recruiting people for civil war. And they have two training compounds, one in Tennessee and one near Waco, Texas, because they basically want to take over. And I'll add, when I was a leader in the Moonies, I heard Moon with his own lips say that we're going to infiltrate the U.S. government, that God doesn't like democracy, he wants a theocracy. And I heard Moon say, when we take power in America, we will amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense if people violate our rules. And at the time, being a brainwashed, radicalized Jewish boy sitting with the top leadership, I thought it was a great idea to take people's physical bodies away and send them to the spirit world so God could take over the earth and make a Garden of Eden again. And it was like totally irrational, not anything I ever believed prior. But that's the power of when you can take over somebody's operating system or their consciousness. I did a chapter in an Oxford University textbook on lone actor terrorism that was published. There were two former FBI officials who wrote forwards for the book, and my chapter was on online radicalization. The rest of the book was largely looking at what were the characteristics of the shooters. And because I've studied social psychology in great depth and hypnosis, and I'm also a clinician. My take is that these are people who have been radicalized online, and it turns out that a large percentage are high functioning on the spectrum folks, people who are uncomfortable in real life with friends, but are very comfortable doing video gaming and making friends online, although they're not real friends. And that's when we were studying ISIS recruitment online in 2015. That was a principal recruiting area, was video games. And especially video games where you're shooting and killing other people as part of the game. And the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk apparently was doing a lot of video gaming. And there's still a lot of information that we're missing in terms of his backstory, but I will not be shocked at all if he turns out to be a high-functioning ASPI. And I should say Elon Musk is celebrated being an ASPI and has a whole group of core followers because he stated publicly that he's an Asperger's person. It turns out I've done work with a lot of folks on the spectrum. They love this document. And they love the bite model because it gives them a roadmap, and it will inoculate them from getting radicalized if they're exposed to it. I should also say the shooter comes from a devout Mormon family, and the Mormon church has rebranded. They don't want to be called Mormon anymore. Now they want to be called the Church of Latter-day Saints. And they're further rebranding to allow members to wear crosses, which they never did because they want to mainstream. But they're in a group that I have helped many people get out of because they fulfill the bite model criteria of authoritarian control. And I taught a workshop in Utah a few years ago with a former sixth generation Mormon who is a psychologist, John Dehlin, who was excommunicated because he was speaking out for gay Mormon young boys and girls because they don't accept gayness, and they were being sent to conversion therapy boot camps to make them straight again. That never has worked, by the way. And people were committing suicide, and he spoke out about it, and they excommunicated him. So John and I did a workshop, a one-day workshop we videotaped for, I think it was 150 former Mormons, and we have video of it on my website. And I'll add that I've created the first course for psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and counselors on how to work with people born into authoritarian cults or dictatorships, or like myself, recruited into one of these groups. This is a book of my methodology written before Trump came to power on how to help loved ones who get involved with controlling people or cults or beliefs. And the methodology works with people in MAGA. But I'll just say a few words about that, and then I'd like to do questions and answers and make sure we cover what your listeners want to most know from me. But because it's a dissociative disorder, like the real Steve became the Mooney Steve, I wasn't erased. I was just taken over, and this new identity was created as a clone of Sun Myung Moon. Anytime anyone said anything negative about Moon or the unification movement or the policies, I was trained to block it and to perceive the person or the source of information as evil. So I was taught to do thought stopping. The phobias that had been programmed in my mind were activated. So what doesn't work is what everyone's been trying to do in the United States due to their lack of understanding about mind control being a man-made mental illness. People have been trying to use facts and logic to argue people out of MAGA, out of a belief in Donald Trump. And it just gets them activated, their cult identity, and makes them feel less connected to you. It's the opposite of what works to help people get out. And what works is love and respect and genuine curiosity and asking questions that prod reality testing. That's the methodology that actually works. But the person that you're talking to has to perceive you as genuinely caring about you and not just trying to talk you out of the group. And so finding common ground, saying things like, I respect you, you're intelligent, you're accomplished, you have, whatever degrees or whatever training the person has. Or, you're my uncle, you're my sister, you're my brother, you're my mother, whatever. I love you and I don't understand. Help me step into your shoes and tell me how you came to adopt these beliefs, because you've changed from the person that I've known previously, and get them thinking back. And again, it's a matter of learning active listening skills and asking in a respectful, curious way. But the goal is to get them to think for themselves, not for you to persuade them that you're right and they're wrong. And the other thing that works is talking about other groups that they would agree are bad, that they would agree are destructive brainwashing entities, for example. And with MAGA, talking about Chinese communist brainwashing is very effective. And that's what was used in my deprogramming back in '76, was the work of Robert J. Lifton, who was then an Air Force psychiatrist, who interviewed people coming out of Mao's thought reform programs in the 50s. And he published a book in '61 called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China. And in chapter 22, he outlined 8 criteria by which anyone could evaluate any environment as a brainwashing environment. So as a Moonie, when I was asked, do you want to learn about Chinese communist brainwashing? As a Moonie, I thought they were Satan, we were God. Sure, I'm interested to hear what Satan does to brainwash people. And we went through the 8 criteria, and it was very obvious the Moonies did all 8. So then I was left with dissonance between my real self and my cult self, going, there's something weird here because we're God and they're Satan. But it still didn't connect the dots for me initially by learning that, but it was a big platform to reality test for me. So talking about Chinese communist brainwashing and learning Lifton's models. Lifton just passed away at age 99, by the way. I have done numerous interviews with him over the years because he was a major factor in my career. And I cite that in my interviews with him. The other thing that works with MAGA is talking about pimps and traffickers. And one of the major fissures that's opened up in MAGA is around this claim that Trump has done for 10 years, that he's going to drain the swamp, he's going to expose the traffickers and the deep state, and he's going to share all the Epstein files. Now he's denying, and Kash Patel is denying there are any files, even though Pam Bondi said the files are on her desk. And Trump is going all out telling Republicans that if you vote to reveal the Epstein files, it will be considered a hostile act against the administration. And everyone who got into QAnon, they were really believing they were going to fight traffickers. They were going to be saving children who've been trafficked. And that's a major reason why Trump wants to divert everyone's attention off of trafficking. But it turns out that my work is used by labor trafficking experts and sex trafficking experts. And trafficking is considered an international crime, but it's defined loosely as fraud, force, or coercion. And my BITE model describes all of these in robust detail. So talking about the BITE model, talking about how pimps recruit and indoctrinate people, giving them a new identity, a new name, isolating them from their families to exploit them is and asking them what they think about how pimps can break a person and make them a slave, gives them the tools to start reality testing and comparing what they're experiencing and not. And with Jimmy Kimmel being canceled last night by Disney because of his comments after the Kirk shooting, another big fisher for people who had historically been Republican is talking about free speech, because what the Trump administration is doing is out of the dictator playbook. He's doing the Putin playbook of censoring any media that isn't going to promote the dictator's point of view. So we really are needing to know who we want to influence, knowing what they believe prior, but engaging them. And so many people have blocked relatives and friends and coworkers because they got radicalized into MAGA. And I'm saying, like, reach out and say, I miss you. I want you back in my life. Let's agree not to talk politics. Let's just be in each other's life and rebuild relationships. So as you can tell, gentlemen and women who are listening, I could go on for weeks with 49 years of my knowledge and research. Well, it's actually more like 51, including my cult involvement. But I think, Chuck, I'd like to just start taking questions and answers, and maybe we can make sure that people get what they need this morning.
Okay, guys, you've been set up. Let's start right. Go ahead, Jim, back in the back of the room here, and others kind of be thinking, because we're all a little stunned right now, so make sure you think it through.
Thank you for your talk. One of the major contradictions I've always thought about was this trafficking issue and QAnon. When Epstein was revealed and the connection with Epstein and Trump was made, where was QAnon? They were the people that were going to go after all the traffickers.
Exactly.
These elite people that were trafficking in girls and women, and where were they when this whole thing broke? It was just amazing to me about the silence, I guess, QAnon's silence.
Yeah, but to remind people, if they did believe in QAnon and did think that there was a deep state and there are, these powerful people who are abusing children, you want to remind them of that and gently ask them, I'm curious. You were so passionate about it a few years ago. What are you feeling now, listening to stories by trafficking victims of Epstein who flew to the Capitol and want their stories to be told? And Donald Trump is saying it's a Democratic hoax. And just, again, it's asking questions. You don't need an answer, but you want to plant seeds.
Okay, got a question from John.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. So you studied with Robert Lifton, and he came up with the notion of malignant normalcy.
Yes.
Right? We have a normality that has become malignant, which can be a sort of a parallel to a cult in that we.
Well, it's the opposite, actually. What he's saying is that malignancy has become normalized, like we're accepting it as if it's normal when it's not. Yeah, go ahead.
So to apply that, what communities do you look to in the United States that may have made the greatest progress in implementing some of your ideas as well as the idea of malignant normalcy?
I feel very frustrated, honestly, because I've been on every major television show over decades. I've been on 60 Minutes, Nightline, Dateline, Today Show, Good Morning America, Larry King, Joe Rogan. But information has been controlled, and since the cult of Trump came out in 2019, I've largely been blacklisted from appearing in the media. So I do talks like this, or podcast interviews and such, and it's been very frustrating. And it just seems to me like everybody's in their silos. Like, I love Timothy Snyder, who's a historian, and he has a lot of valuable things to say, but he hasn't made the effort to learn about the history of psychological warfare and how it's become more sophisticated and how it's being leveled on people today through the digital means. So and that's why I keep saying yes to invitations to do free talks to small groups of people. I used to get paid $5,000 for an hour's talk to thousands of people, but I can't get that audience. So I do these because who knows, somebody may have the resources or know somebody who knows somebody where I can get a bigger reach. And lately I've been trying on Substack. I was recently, I think it was Monday, on Lev Parnas's Substack Live. Lev was the fellow who was sent with Rudy Giuliani to Ukraine to dig up dirt on the Bidens, and then became a whistleblower. And there's a great documentary called From Russia with Lev. Anyway, he asked me to be on his Substack Live, so I did it, and we recorded it. And I'm hoping to do more of those.
So a lot of grassroots. I have a question for you, and we'll pass it. You talked about talking to your friends and family or whoever that you love them, and to get them receptive to your feelings. What do you do when you finally get down to say, well, what's the basis of your beliefs? Isn't that the point where then you say, what's the logic in that, or where are the facts for that? Because then aren't they going to shut down right there and say, well, these are our facts and those are your facts, and our facts are better than your? I mean,
yeah, that's why I'm saying facts and logic is not going to work.
So you let them just come to that on their own rather than pointing.
No, you're asking them questions, and the key is, people haven't been born into the cult of Trump. Most people didn't know Trump existed unless you're from New York like me. Before 10 years ago, he started getting well known. Other than The Apprentice reality television show, which they did for 10 years. That was led, by the way, by Mark Burnett, who is the head of there's something called Seven Mountain Dominionism. It's part of the Christian nationalist takeover of the government and such. Mark Burnett is in charge of media, and he cultivated this false notion that Trump is a successful business person. But most people didn't know anything about Trump. So I recommend asking, what's your first memory of Donald Trump? And most people I ask say, I saw him on The Apprentice. And then I ask them, well, do you remember what you thought or felt the first time you saw him? And when people honestly reflect, most people say they thought he was a bully, or they thought he was a braggart, or how arrogant he was. Very few people come up with positive praise for Donald Trump. Another thing I want to just add, if I may, before we move on to the next question, and this is really troubling for me amongst the opposition to the current administration, is people don't understand that Donald Trump was recruited by Russia, the Soviet Union, in the 80s. There are still people out there who say, no, there's no proof, and there's overwhelming proof. And I start by just saying his first trip to Russia was in 87, and he came back took out a full-page ad in the New York Times saying NATO should be disbanded. Like, is this not, prima facie evidence of something happened during that trip? I interviewed Craig Unger and Yuri Shvets. I have a two-part interview on my Substack. Craig wrote a book called American Compromat, with a K, and compromat is the Russian term for blackmail. And there's a whole book on Russia, and Maxwell, I would add, Robert Maxwell, touches a bit on Ghislaine, but mostly the father, working for Russia as well as for Mossad. Yuri Shvets, if you watch the interview, Yuri came to the U.S. after the Soviet Union collapsed. Yuri, I'm gonna butcher his accent, but Yuri said, "I was much higher up in the KGB than Vladimir was. It was standard operating procedure to bring Western businessmen to the Soviet Union to set them up with pretty girls and videotape them so we could blackmail them." He was there. That's what he did for the KGB. There are other former KGB officials who have defected and have been saying this is the fact. Just look at how Trump behaves, not what he says, but what he does. And this has been a Russian coup of America. Not that China hasn't been involved, because Russia, Putin and Xi have a partnership. But this is not an organic presidency with Americans who care about America. Trump put uniquely unqualified people in every government post and fired or forced people who are equipped to protect us to do their jobs. He forced them out. Who benefits? Russia benefits. China benefits. We don't, as Americans. Anyway, that was a small rant. Back to questions.
That's why you're here. Question from Dick.
Yeah, my question is the issue of, my question has to do with this information and disinformation and where we get our information. I have many friends. We have differences of opinion on what is the best source of information. And I feel really good about where I get mine from, but they also feel really good about theirs, and it's opposite from mine. What do you advise people? What can you say to people, when they're getting their information when you think it's opposite of what it should be?
Yeah, great question. So there's there's an entity that I've been, I don't make any money from endorsing it, but I tell people about a thing called Ground News, GROUND.news, and it's an aggregator of news stories. And what it does is it gives you the story, and it gives you all of the coverage, so-called on the left or the progressive side, and all the coverage on the right or the authoritarian side, conservative side. And I recommend that people read not just what they normally read, but read from other points of view to see how what information is sculpted, what's left out, what's emphasized. And what I say also is I recommend, especially for intellectual-oriented people, to read Adam Grant's book called Think Again. Adam is an organizational psychologist. He has a very popular TED podcast. And he opens the book with an interview with Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize for behavioral economics for his book Thinking Fast and Slow. It's one of the geniuses of our lifetime. And Adam says to him, "Daniel, your initial theory has been disproven. What do you have to say about it?" And Daniel said, "I'm delighted." And Adam said, "How can you be delighted? It was your theory that you based your career on." He said, "I don't care. I just want to help science. I just want us to have better understanding of what's reality." And the book goes on to talk about we need to separate our beliefs from our egos. and be prepared to change our minds on subjects instead of entrenching and so I really take it to heart that I'm ready to change my mind, and talking to anybody, convince me. Give me stuff that makes sense to me, not just intellectual, but evidence-based stuff. And in the meantime, I have my lived experience to ground me. And there's a lot of things out there that we don't have concrete answers for. So I remain open-minded. So there are people who are convinced there are aliens in outer space who are visiting the U.S. and Earth, and I'm like, I'd like to believe that we're not alone and that there are other intelligent entities out there, but I haven't seen anything that's convinced me that it's true. So, but I remain open.
Okay, we've got a question from Rob.
Thank you, sir. The question is that you have been deprogrammed, so whatever that means.
I can tell you what it means because I've been doing it for 50 years.
But first of all, I'd like to know, is there a recidivism of people who've been deprogrammed to go back to where they came, and number two, it seems to me that in your mind, there is something of that program that was overrode whatever you were previously, and it's still there. And I think Bessel van der Kolk has spoken in the Body Keeps the Score, which I read 20 years ago when it came out. And what is in the subconscious that you can actually override? Is there such a thing?
Yeah, so I know Bessel for many decades. So let me state that when I was deprogrammed, it was 1976, and the only methodology that was being practiced was a forceful grab the person. In my case, they didn't have to grab me. My crutches were taken away, so I couldn't get up and walk out of my sister's house. But I did agree to meet with the deprogrammers just to prove to my parents that I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed. I was that confident about it. But the methodology back then was very content-based, and it did attack the leader, the doctrine, and the group. And it did use Lifton's 8 criteria. But part of what was so powerful about that approach was, A, the person was out of the cult for that period of time. Because when you're in a cult, as I was working 18 to 21 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I had no time to reflect, no vacation time, nada. But what happened after my near-fatal van crash was I was in the hospital for 2 weeks away from the group. They had given me 1 cassette recorder and 1 tape of Moon's speech, and that was it. So that allowed my brain to stop the constant reinforcement. And that's one of the major problems we have today is people are on their cell phones 8 to 12 hours a day. So it's like a constant influence thing. In any case, what really I think was working, and I did do a number of deprogrammings before I went back to college, was being physically away from the group, meeting former members who were not frothing at the mouth, but were warm and telling their experiences, learning about Chinese communist brainwashing. But there was recidivism. In my case, I did, I think, 12 cases of deprogramming. 2 went back to the Moonies. They later left. But when I became a mental health professional and I got into deconstructing what was done to me and the formation, and then just having endless clients, maybe several thousand over the years, I began to understand how important neuroplasticity and neurogenesis was in teaching people how to deconstruct how they were recruited and indoctrinated. And it's a very specialized technique that isn't taught in any university anywhere in the world, which is partly why I did this course. And so for me, it involves educating people with the models and understanding social psychology, understanding hypnosis, etc., asking my client to go back to how they got recruited. And there is a difference between working with people recruited, like I was at 19, versus people born into a group. That's more complicated and more difficult. But the point is I go back, I have my client go back to when they were recruited and ask them to remember what they thought they were joining. And nobody says I was joining a cult. They thought they were falling in love with the recruiter. They thought it was a self-help group. They thought they were going to help fight, ecological destruction or some other benign or positive purpose. And I asked them, if you knew then what you know now, what would you say and do differently? I would have told them to get lost. So what I'm doing is teaching people a technique of how to rewire their own cult identity formation and indoctrination. And I have them bookend how they got in, how they got out, and start with 3 major events that happened during their involvement. But in the end, you want to help the person to exit themselves out fully. And by knowing all of these things, you are future proofing them from getting into another cult. If they really understand the influence continuum and the bite model and what to watch out for, what questions to ask, how to do independent research, people don't get into other cults. But if you were born into the Mormons or born into the Jehovah's Witnesses or in the Soviet Union, and you exit and you never learn about brainwashing and mind control, you're very susceptible to some other authoritarian group coming along because that's what's familiar for you. That's what is normal for the younger you. And so when I'm working with people born in these groups, I have to first teach them what a healthy childhood would have looked like if they weren't born into a cult or an authoritarian regime. But what I'm trying to convey to you is that if it's done properly, people will never want to get into another authoritarian situation.
Leaving aside people born into a cult, is there a particular set of personality types, life circumstances that make an individual
it's a great question
to recruitment?
It's a great question. So to answer it properly, I will first say that one of the cognitive biases we humans have when we're trying to understand other humans is called the fundamental attribution error. And why it's called the fundamental attribution error is because it's so universal. And the problem is when we're looking at why people get into cults, 99% of the public goes, what was wrong with them that made them vulnerable? Were they weak? Were they stupid? Were they gullible? Did they not have an education? Did they not have a good religion? Did they not have a good family? And the attribution error activates because people overestimate disposition or personality and underestimate social influence. And so to answer your question, in my career, what is the universal are situational vulnerabilities. I was vulnerable because my girlfriend dumped me at 19 and 3 women flirted with me at my college in the cafeteria. And they lied. And I had no understanding that they were lying, that they weren't students because they seemed so nice and sincere and kind, etc. So breakup in a relationship, death of a loved one, illness, graduation, losing a job, moving to a new city, state, or country, some trauma that happens, sexual assault trauma or mugging or something, that if they're not properly addressed psychologically, a recruiter can take advantage of that moment. But the universal vulnerability is thinking, I'm too smart. It would never happen to me. It only happens to weak people or stupid people or lonely people. So if you have humility and you go, I'm a human and I can be lied to and trust the wrong person, I can't, and these days I am on my phone 7 hours a day, or 8 or 9 or 10. It's like this is constantly bathing our brains. And I actually did an interview with Asa Raskin and Tristan Harris, who do the Center for Humane Technology, and they have a podcast called Your Undivided Attention. And I talked about being on your phone for that many hours. It's like it induces a hypnotic state where you're not analyzing what's coming at you. You're watching these short videos, but you're not thinking them through. Who made this? Is it real? What are their claims? And often really successful brainwashing uses elements of truth, sprinkles it in, and nudges people with disinformation points. So it's not a one-shot deal. It's something that barrages the person over time.
So we've got about 6 minutes left here. Let's go with one last question from Jim, and then you can use that as your wrap up on giving us, I hope, at least a little positive feeling of going when we leave today on what we can do about that.
Doctor, I'd like you to look into the future and just say we can get through this horror story that we seem to be in right now. What's on the horizon? What is there cults out there that you see in their infancy that will be apparent once we get away from this one?
The two existential threats seemed to me to be global climate crisis, warming, and AI. From what I hear from people like Jeffrey Hinton, and AI, when we are depending on a chatbot to tell us what to think, and we're not thinking for ourselves, this is a real problem. And people like Jeffrey Hinton are talking about these models being super intelligent, and at some point a singularity they're talking about where they're smarter than us, and they won't allow us to turn them off. So that's a real problem. But on a positive note, what I can tell you is the human spirit wants to be free. We don't like to be lied to. We don't like to be exploited. It makes us angry and resentful, and it makes us rebel against anyone who's an oppressor, anyone who's a bully, anyone who's a dictator, anyone who's taking our rights away or forcing us to, not take care of our health. I don't know about you, but I've been paying into Social Security. I'm on Medicare. I want my benefits. I don't want that taken away. And they're going to try to take it away. So what's the hope? The hope is that there's more of us than them. There's a lot of very smart people, but we're not organized, and we're not being strategic, and we're being reactive. It's like a lot of people are still in shock and they can't believe this is happening, instead of going, this is real, this is happening, who are the bad actors, where are the experts who can direct us, how do we channel the resources they need to build inoculation programs for our children, for everyone else. When Biden was in power, I tried my best to explain he should declare a public health emergency and teach people about brainwashing and mind control, and use my charts, and have former members speak and destigmatize the fact that millions of Americans currently their brains are co-opted into an authoritarian mindset. So what's the hope? The hope is that our DNA in the United States is freedom-oriented. People in Russia are used to the Tsar and Stalin and all of these other dictators, but we're used to freedom, and we don't like having our freedoms taken away. And the key is going to be mobilizing everyone to the ability that they can with the resources that they have to make a contribution daily, even an hour a day, to do something to help others, to understand what's happening here. It's going to really be a bottom up thing. I was talking to one of the leaders in 50501. They're going to do another protest, No King's Day, on October 18th. But it's a top down movement, and they're not open to learning what I'm trying to explain is going on. And we need former members to get educated, start sharing their stories, and my models to really be taught to people on a local level. And that's, again, a reason that I say yes to small gigs like this. Happily, I'm doing this. And hopefully you'll leave today feeling like, okay, there's someone who actually has very concrete, specific suggestions of how to make things better. Let's amplify it. So everyone has to decide where you're called to do. And if you pick one person that you know in your life who's MAGA that you care about, spend the next year warming up the relationship again. Go fishing with them. Go play chess. Do stuff, and ask questions, because they do have dissonance. People will leave, but they need to feel like you're not going to go, told you so. Why didn't you listen to me? People need a face-saving way to exit. So that's my parting words.
Well, we certainly appreciate that, Doctor. So let's say thanks to Stephen.